Transportation Research Center that houses our coalition. I want to thank everyone for coming out. I'm very excited about this day. We've been working on it for over a year. I want to thank all of our partners and co-sponsors, particularly Energy Vision. Joanna will be speaking shortly, and Matt Tomick is right there. And Vermont Gas, Casella, High Metals Fund, and the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Markets for co-sponsoring this event. Vermont Clean Cities is a Department of Energy funded program that promotes alternative fuels in the transportation sector. We have always promoted natural gas as an alt fuel because it's a wonderful alt fuel for a lot of reasons, but we have been more and more trying to look into renewable sources of natural gas, and that's why we particularly wanted to support this event. So I'm looking forward to a great day, and I'm going to let Joanna take it from here.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you for being here. I want to say at the outset that we hope that every one of you will think about what you can do and how much the area of renewable natural gas interests you. Give us feedback, since the purpose of this event is not academic. The purpose of this is to perhaps suggest areas of change that could be very exciting for a state that is already, from an environmental point of view, very exciting. In any case, I want to thank Michelle and Clean Cities and UVM for helping us with this event, and especially my colleague Matt Tomick for putting it together. It really is especially exciting to be here this morning. Energy Vision, the national nonprofit organization that I run, has been looking at alternative fuels, ways to free this country from its dependence on foreign oil and oil in general because of its levels of pollution, greenhouse gas contribution, impacts on public health and the economy. We've been doing this since the late 80s, when we wrote the first report in the country comparing all possible alternative fuels, and concluded, much to the unhappiness then of the Environmental Protection Agency, which was a strong supporter of methanol, that natural gas looked like the clear winner at the moment to us. Then we realized 2 years later, why did no one like natural gas? And it was really because they assumed a liquid fuel. That was it. But we didn't assume anything when we started looking. We compared all the options. And this one has, although we trace all of them, stood up very nicely and has become more sophisticated, more viable over the years, especially for heavy-duty buses and trucks. We focused on studying them because even though they're only 4% of all the vehicles in the country, they contribute or use almost a quarter of all the on-road vehicle fuels. That's huge. So when you convert a garbage truck or a transit bus from diesel to natural gas, you've taken a big step forward. What we're looking at today was the one fuel that 2 decades ago we knew nothing about, and that has emerged since then, is renewable natural gas made from organic waste. And just briefly, what you will hear today is a picture of a fuel that's technologically available, that is as clean as fossil gas, that requires no drilling, that turns organic waste that were long considered garbage into a valuable fuel, and that reduces greenhouse gases by 88% or more, in some cases by 100%. It's an enormous resource in urban and in rural areas. And for us at Energy Vision, we are running a series of workshops like this across the country from groups that would like to see this technology introduced into their regions. So we plan to be working and supporting Clean Cities and UVM Transportation Research Center in the coming year as we study more evolved forms and new projects in renewable natural gas. and can share ones especially that will be useful in Vermont. Logistics and upfront financing are really the main challenges to this industry. I think I'd like to end by simply saying that what everyone knows, that the competition for oil and now for natural gas around the world becomes more intense every day. Looking at the Ukraine, looking at Russian gas, looking at the situation in Europe, looking at Canada and the United States. Fossil fuels are, in fact, becoming something fought over more and more, and many of the wars in the world, including Sudan and South Sudan, are over oil and gas. Every day that we wake up, there are net 202,000 more people on the earth. Therefore, that affects the timing of what we do now. The time is very important, and moving forward is very important. And we are thrilled to be doing our first workshop of the year here in Vermont because it is a small state, and because, oh, my cell phone is ringing, sorry. I'll turn it off. And because the leadership in Vermont has been so innovative that it's particularly exciting to us to be doing this. So I think that's the end. You'll learn a lot about this technology over this day, and I hope you'll conclude what we found when we did the first workshop that we did out in Seattle, where one of the attendees left and came up to us and shook his head and said, I don't know, there must be something I don't understand. This looks like a no-brainer to me. And we think he was right. I'd like to introduce someone who I really, in fact, needs no introduction here, and that is the Secretary of the Vermont Agency for Agriculture, Farms, and Markets, Chuck Ross. We are thrilled that he could take time to come and offer his thoughts on this session. He was for 16 years staff director here for Patrick Leahy, and his entire career has, we think, steered him more and more to being one of the real energy, agriculture, etc. innovators in this country. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Chuck Ross and to turn it over for his opening remarks. Thank you.
In keeping with Vermont tradition, I don't need introduction because I know most of you. Thanks for having me here today. And I wasn't sure who exactly was going to be here or how many, so I'm going to kind of adjust my remarks to the fact that most of you probably heard me blather on before. But I do want to make a couple of points because I think this is an incredibly important and frankly one of the most exciting elements of agriculture in the state of Vermont right now. We in the agency have a lot of exciting things happening, but when I first became secretary, one of the things I wanted to make sure continue to happen and that had fallen off the plate for funny reasons is to get somebody back in the agency in the way of Alex Lapellis now, who would focus on ag energy opportunities, because I think ag energy is absolutely critical for a whole bunch of reasons that relate obviously to the farm, but extend to the communities in Vermont and offer an opportunity to develop models that are relevant to the rest of the country and potentially to the rest of the world. So one of the things that's clear, and you know, when you're in my position, people give you credit for things that you really don't deserve credit for, and the credit really goes to the people who are out in the field doing the work, and that is the innovation that has happened in Vermont and on the farm with respect to energy. And I just want to touch on a few and focus on one or two in particular. We are and continue to be one of the leaders in the country for methane digesters, biogas utilization on the farm. What's interesting is we're not only one of the leaders on a per capita basis, which is pretty easy to do on some things because there's so few of us, but we're actually among the leaders in absolute numbers of methane digesters that are being operated on the farm. And when I say that, that's really saying something, because there are so few of us, that we are among the leaders in absolute numbers of utilization of methane digesters on the farm on a state-by-state comparison basis. That's pretty enormous. But it doesn't, I'm going to return to methane digesters, but it doesn't stop there. We have been one of the pioneers in this state in terms of on-farm biodiesel production, where we have demonstrated by virtue and the we, I always want to underscore the we. The we is not me, the we is you, those of you in the field that are doing this, the entrepreneurs, the farmers. We have figured out how to produce biodiesel on our farms in Vermont that are not necessarily as easy to manage as some of the farm fields in the Midwest. We've been able to produce biodiesel in a way and at a price that is cheaper than the alternative, which is buying it off the farm, and makes sense to use on the farm. Now, how far we're going to be able to expand that, well, that's partly up to you, the farmers in the state. But we're figuring out how to do that. We are also, in this state, been pushing the grass to energy conversation. And I'm not talking about cellulosic ethanol, I'm talking about harvesting grass as a dry-based fuel and turning it into pellets and utilizing it in that regard. We now, I've been on this issue for 7-8 years. We started with how do we do this? What are all the unintended consequences? We now at the point where we have the technology to burn the grass. We know what comes out of the stack. We really are in a place now where it's a market demand question. Can we get the demand in the marketplace to drive the technology? And Alex and I have been at a couple of conversations where we're just catching the opportunity to bring the market to Vermont and establish some grass to energy opportunities. And once that happens, like the methane digesters, like the biodiesel, one can only contemplate and think about what all the innovations that can come from that might be. And clearly the other areas where renewable energy is being done on the Vermont farms are wind and solar. Now wind is not so big, but solar is huge. We're seeing solar quote unquote farms or solar facilities put up on farm fields all over the state of Vermont. And I believe we are now among the leaders on a per capita basis in installation of solar on an annual basis, which is again on the farm and is again farmers being entrepreneurs, and is again really incredible that Vermont is leading the country in figuring out how to do this stuff. And that is because I think we have an enormously productive partnership between our legislators, our executive branch, and our farmers and entrepreneurs in the energy field. And I know the farmers alone don't do it. There's a lot of good companies in this state that are trying to figure out how to help people install this stuff. So to me, this is enormously exciting and important. And let me return to the biodigesters, because that has been where we started probably innovating first. We have now 5 megawatts, or we'll soon have close to 5 megawatts of green baseload power distributed in the state of Vermont. And that's pretty significant. And we have ongoing innovation happening. We have Vermont Technical College putting up their own biodigester, looking at how to integrate organics into our biowaste methane stream to supercharge our methane digesters so they're even more efficient, take the organics out of the waste stream, utilize them, and then compost them, and then utilize them again. That's the kind of closed loop kind of thinking that I think we can do in the state, because frankly we have the ethos and we have the interconnectivity on an interpersonal entrepreneurial basis. That is the kind of stuff that really does help change and shape the future. And when we talk about biodigesters, we also need to understand we're only using about 10% of the manure in the state of Vermont right now, cow manure, to generate that 5 megawatts. In our operation, we've estimated any number of times how much could we generate in the way of power in the state of Vermont, and it feels like it could be potentially 30 megawatts. Sounds reasonable. And what's again interesting in the state of Vermont, though, is we have farmers trying different systems. There's not just one methane digesting system in the state of Vermont, there's a number of them. And it's not just happening on the farm, it's also happening at the University of Vermont, by way of example. Andrew Wright is actually doing the research to figure out what kinds of biology, if you will, we need to have in our methane digesters to make them ever more efficient. And so, think about where we started, which was just let that stuff cook, to now we're figuring out what kind of bugs are the best bugs to have in there. And, I see Bill Rowell's here, and Bill is involved with Andrew Wright in trying to figure out, I think, some of your manure is part of his study. Again, the intersection of you as entrepreneurs, we as farmers, we as the executive legislative branch with our academic foundation is what makes us able to do things better, quicker, faster, and more effectively than maybe any place else in the country. And for that, I think we all need to congratulate ourselves and not rest on our laurels, but keep pushing, because that's why we are where we are, in my view. And I also have to, say there's another innovation that's happening, and that's in the biomethane digesting arena, and that is the whole concept of aggregation. We know we got a lot of manure. When and how can we aggregate it? I've looked at any number of business plans that just don't quite make it, but we got one that's happening the way of Dan Smith, that he's, ain't there yet, but he's getting there, about aggregating manure, putting the gas in a pipeline and sending it to Middlebury College to offset hundreds of thousands of gallons of number 6 diesel. To help Middlebury College be what? Maybe be the cleanest carbon-free campus in the United States of America, if and when this happens. Now that's just another incredible demonstration that happens in this state and why we continue to be a leader in the United States of America. And my view has always been, ever since I was in the legislature back in the 90s, and we passed the CFC-free auto air conditioning bill, that's where we belong, is on the edge, leading, figuring out the new stuff, because we can take advantage of the network and the connectivity we have in the state of Vermont. And we have this edge right now in energy, ag energy, and we need to keep it. And that's where we get our greatest value, in my estimation. There'll, once we get this methane digesting stuff completely figured out, hold on, because everybody else is going to try to do the same thing, and they're going to kick our butt in terms of size, and eventually they'll probably even out-research us on certain parts of it. But that's where we need to be, is figuring this stuff out. That's where the value for Vermont, I believe, is highest. And by the way, when we do that, we just reinforce who we are and what we need and what we want, because we're figuring it out ahead of time. We build the intellectual capital here. Bill Rowell and I were just talking about, the different manure management techniques he's trying to figure out on the farm. That's building intellectual knowledge that's relevant to people around the country. And we will, and I believe we can, and we are, and we have been getting paid to figure that stuff out. So why else is it important, just besides this leadership thing? Well, in my view, it's really important because it increases the financial viability of the farms. When we are farmers, we're no different than any other economic enterprise, because, by the way, we are businesses. We need to diversify our revenue stream on the farm. And when we can build successful energy opportunities and have a different revenue stream generated on the farm, we increase our viability, we diversify our income base. And one thing is clear that I learned when I was in Seattle, Washington. You want a diverse economic base, whether you're a community that depends upon Boeing and they rose and fell based upon the success of Boeing, or a farm. The more income streams you have, the more diverse your revenue streams, the more stable you probably would be going forward. And oh, by the way, this ag energy allows us to utilize underutilized resources on our farm, whether they be farm roofs or ground that isn't particularly useful for some other use on the farm, of which most farms have sometimes an ample supply, but certainly have some. And when we have these highly developed, and they are highly developed farmsteads, well, there's another great place. I mean, you think about what happens in a farmstead, and you're talking about, particularly on a good-sized farm, you're talking about a business park. You've got a lot of stuff happening, and what a great place to put a generator right on that farmstead, because it is already essentially an industrial park on the farm. If you think about what happens on those farms. And so not only do we get to leverage that built environments are already there, we get to generate product that, in the way of nutrients, that can be composted and then sold off the farm again. So not only do you get energy that you can use on your farm and sell off the farm, you get a compost stream that you could sell off the farm, you get bedding inputs that you can displace other sources. So you begin to see how a methane digester on a farm, and particularly then if you couple it with, if you get a solar array as well, you are really starting to replace costs, displace costs, and increase revenue and diversify the viability, diversify the income stream, and therefore increase the viability of the farm. And oh, by the way, it has the other ancillary benefit of it enhances your ability to manage manure, which is good for water quality and good for our community and addresses one of the biggest challenges facing agriculture today in Vermont, and that is the water quality issue. And it also increases energy security because you're doing it right on your own farm. You get control of your own destiny. And as we continue to see ways to diversify our energy inputs on the farm, we will continue to do that even more. You know, there was a day when the big deal was whether you had a generator on your farm, so when the power went down, you could keep milking. Well, now we're talking about a whole new energy source. We're not talking about just having to bring in a generator on the farm. We're talking about having you generating the energy on the farm, utilize it on the farm. So we're also, on these farms, leveraging what used to be waste into usable products, and that is always a good thing, and we're providing an opportunity to comply with the thrust of some legislation, which is to pull organics out of the waste stream and put them into a productive stream, which is to put them in the biodigesters, and as I mentioned earlier, supercharge those digesters. Now, is that trouble-free? Are there some public policy questions there? You bet there are. But we got to figure those out, and that's what, frankly, you folks need to be doing here. So get to it, would you? And then tell us policymakers what we need to do. And we're also taking advantage when we do this on-farm energy. We're leveraging existing infrastructure. I talked about the infrastructure that's on the farmstead, the farm buildings, the roofs, that whole complex, as well as the underutilized ground. But we're also taking advantage of a few other things. Dan Smith's going to take advantage of a pipeline, if it gets built, that's going to be able to transport his gas someplace in Middlebury College, so he doesn't have to truck it. He doesn't have to build that whole piece of infrastructure to do that. When we have distributed generation, as we do in the state of Vermont with methane digesters, and increasingly so with solar PV, we get to utilize a very unique piece of infrastructure that only the state of Vermont has, and that is a statewide smart grid that allows us to integrate the utilization of new generation into our grid to increase stability, potentially if we target it, if we get smart about where we're going to actually target it, if we ever get to the point where you can say really where we need 3 or 4 megs is up in this part of the state or down in that part of the state, and you can set that to happen, we will avoid transmission costs that would have to otherwise be incurred to balance the grid, and that is an enormous savings. And oh, by the way, if we get good at this and we have a smart grid, we can call on the power when we need it and avoid peak rates, which is the most expensive and most cost-effective things we can do. All this is possible because we're actually generating power on our farms in places we didn't before, and we have an infrastructure that allows us to do that and to utilize it in the most cost-effective way. And that's all stuff we're doing in the state of Vermont. And much of it is unique, and I would say the aggregate is tremendously unique when you look across the country. So, Joanna and I were talking, and I want to thank you for, your long and enduring efforts in the energy field, and your help with this event today. And we were talking about transportation, which is and the replacement of transportation fuels, and which is really interesting because we're generating a lot of electricity. We've actually figured out how to do electricity pretty well in the state, but we have an enormous problem in the state of Vermont, and that's because we're rural, and as a consequence, we have an enormous amount of vehicle miles to be covered every year by every one of us. And so when we do biogas really well, and we figure out how to transport it by pipelines, or figure out how to utilize it better, we get to replace a whole set of fossil fuels with biofuels, which are particularly good for trucking and larger transportation. We get to do that piece as well. And we already have some biogas or some natural gas fueling stations in Vermont, and we can make them biogas fueling stations, and we can have our big trucks plug into those, and we got our, and thank you for your nudging of Casella to help them understand that there's a real opportunity there, and thank you for Casella for actually having, the foresight to step up and do it. I mean, it's really, one of the things I want to underscore here is that there's a whole community of us that do this stuff. Some of us are the ones that have the ideas and are pushing the ideas, but it's the entrepreneurs, the people that are in business that actually say, okay, I'll take that risk, I'll try that out, and I'll try to be part of this vanguard. And we don't get here unless we have people in the business community to do that. And that, I can't underscore that enough. And that's true of farmers, because at the end of the day, if they are one thing, those men and women, they are business people. Is to underscore that point. Farms are businesses, they need to make money. We need to understand they need to make money. It is not just a Vermont life cover image that they are living. They are living a business, and we need to understand that. And they too have a responsibility to act like a responsible business. And the great news about Vermont farmers are they do. Not every one of them, just like the regular business community, they're not all perfect. But the vast majority of farmers in the state are stepping up, and they are being part of the innovators along with standard businesses like Casella. So when I look at the transportation fuel business, I see that there's some real opportunities. The methane digesters, when they are generating power and transferring that to the grid, they help stabilize the grid. And why is that important? Because if we're going to do electric vehicles in the state, which is one of the things we need to do, because we are probably not going to have the biogas distribution network we need to support gas cars, we need a very stable and very smart grid to enable those cars to travel from Swanton to Brattleboro and back and not run out of juice. That means we need a stable grid and a smart grid. And when we have electricity being generated from biomethane on farms, that can be helpful. When we provide biogas, as we are, and we can figure out ways to put it in pipelines or utilize it on the farm for large vehicles there, then we are enhancing our transportation infrastructure as well. And most importantly, as we figure out how to do these things better through research and development, like Andrew Wright, and when we figure out how to bring our organics into our methane digesters and address some of the public policy issues about post-consumer waste, but we supercharge our digesters and allow them to create even more biogas, then we have more resource. And if we can figure out how to get those into these large trucks and tractors and other vehicles, we are going to enhance our ability to address the issues around transportation in the state of Vermont. So let me close by making a few other broader comments. The reason why I am excited by this is two, well, there's multiple reasons, but I'll tell you two. One is because I think this is an interesting and fascinating economic opportunity for the state of Vermont in agriculture. The second reason is one of the things we're trying to do in the Agency of Agriculture is build community-based agriculture. Agriculture that is integral to, networked with, economically integrated with the community in which they live, work, and run their business. When we have this kind of ag energy on the farm, in the communities, we are building models of community-based agriculture. And when we do that, I believe we're starting to build models that are going to be critical to the success of our communities, economically, culturally, and environmentally. And we're building success for the growth of one of the three critical elements of the 21st century. Those are food, water, and energy. So we're actually knocking all three of those when we do this well. Because why? Because we're helping those farms be better, more efficient food producers. We're helping them do a better job on water quality. And oh, by the way, ag energy is what energy. And so we're addressing three of the most critical issues confronting the 21st century if we're going to live within the ecological limits of this globe, and that's hitting those three issues. And we're doing that with ag energy on the farm, in Vermont, in our communities, where our communities are invested, understand, and support the farmers and what they're doing. That is a model that needs to be replicated throughout Vermont and beyond. And if we can do that in communities, we're going to have the 99% of the people who are not involved in farm and food production actually understand better why farms are important. And they can be part of their business infrastructure in their communities, in and on the ground, that currently is either not used or is waiting to be used by what I consider poor use of farmland, and that is residential and commercial enterprises that could be located someplace else. So that's why I'm a little evangelical about the work you folks are doing, because I actually think it is addressing a critical component of what we need in the state of Vermont, which is supporting working landscape in the communities that we all live in. But I also think it's building models, economically successful, culturally successful, environmentally successful models that we can replicate elsewhere in this country. And when we can do that, we are making a real contribution. So thanks for the work you do. And I would be remiss if I didn't also do my one advertisement, which is that there is going to be an announcement with our sister agency, the Public Service Department, that there will be an RFP on the street for pilot projects to process food waste for use in the existing Vermont digesters. And Alex DePillis is the person you can talk to about that. Again, starting to push and continue to push the kind of innovation and development that we need to see in the state of Vermont. So thanks for all the work you do. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to go defend myself in the legislature in about 45 minutes, so I'm going to probably head out pretty quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Since you've mentioned aggregating organics and having the chance, in some cases between municipal food waste and manure from farms, we did a manual on the steps to take to develop these programs for transportation, and particularly look at, in part of it, the whole question of the steps you take to see where the wastes are that are within an area that can be moved into a digester where it's economical. So I would like to give you a copy of our manual,
Great,
which I hope will be useful, and to say that the stories in Vermont are what give us the stories that we tell across the country that inspires change elsewhere. We don't invent the solutions. And P.S., neither does government. Government can support them. Business develops the solutions. And our job is to move that information around so that people are excited about getting on board. And if we can say, here's what they did in Vermont. That's all we need to say.